We're off the rails. Now we are trains ourselves. No wait and see.
Hello and welcome to this second session on migrations. We're looking at creating tables and adding and removing columns. So migrations inherit from active record migration within the so each of the migrations are named differently, the classes, and they all inherit from this active record migration class. And we use a change method within this class to specify the changes needed. We can do create table, drop table in the migration, and that allows us to make and delete tables. Rake DB migrate is necessary after a Rails migration has been generated, because that moves it over to the database. And we can also use migrations to add and remove columns from a current table. So let's look at creating the books table. We actually did this in an earlier session. So we've got our migration on the right, and of course inheriting from active record migration. We've got our change method, and within that the create table code in order to create the table books. We can see at the bottom of that create table command that t.timestamps refers to our created at and updated at columns, which are made automatically. And when we look after rake db migrate at .schema for the correct table, we can see that there is a create table if not exists books. So that migration has been carried out. And this is on our Rails DB, which is allowing us to access SQLite. The rolling back migrations can be a bit dangerous. We do need to be a little bit careful because this can delete useful data. So rake DB rollback undoes a previous migration, and Rails DB then shows no books table because we've created the books table in our previous migration. So that could be a problem if you had lots of data in that table. For the moment, we only had our one book in there, so it wasn't a huge issue. We can use the change method in migration to specify changes needed. And this also applies for adding and removing columns. So to add a column, we do add column, the table name, and then the column name that we want to add, and also the type for that column, whether it's an integer, decimal, string, etc. We can also remove a column, and we then need to give the table name and the column name of the column that we want to remove. Again, we need to run rake db migrate, and we can now look at adding columns. So adding description, for instance, Rails generate migration, add description to books description. So the migration automatically creates this file, which we can see on the bottom left, and adds description to books, specifies the class which we're going to create and the changes we want to make to the table. We actually have to add our code in ourselves to this change method, add column books description string, because well, this is added by the Rails generate in this case, but we do need that code in order to run rake db migrate, and then that will add our description column to the table. If we want to add a price, we can also do that. So we can do Rails generate add price to books, price decimal curly brackets 5,2 curly brackets, and that the 5,2, this is a decimal price value. So for books, they don't get much more than £100. I can't imagine books which are much more than that, but some are. You have 5 digits in the full number. And for the scale, of course, that's referring to the numbers after the decimal points. There are 2 numbers after the decimal point. So in total, there are 5 digits. And after a decimal point, there are 2, which is correct amount for a price, especially if we're using pounds or dollars, whichever we wish. So the migration for adding columns, RakeDB migrate, we run, and this, as we can see, adds a column for books description string and also for books price decimal precision 5 scale 2. So we can see that within our command line. Within the schema RB, this gets updated, and we have at the top here active record schema.define. We have the specified version. So this is a date timestamp which tells us what version this is. So we've got the year, month, day, and then the time. So here we can also see force cascade. Now this is a recreating the table structure completely anew, but we do still keep the data within it. So this is in fact a latest snapshot of the columns in the table, and on a new machine we'd use RakeDB schema : load to avoid running all the migrations from scratch. So that means we can run all of the migrations in one go from the latest snapshot that we have. So it can be useful to add these schema.rb files to our version control Git, so that we can see it online and easily make all the changes that we need in one go. So we can now move on to renaming columns. So Rails generate rename description to review allows us to change a description column to a review column if we so wish to do that. So create migration, which makes the timestamp and the class name, and we add code to change the method manually. So we have to add that in ourselves. So we add in our rename column method, which is one of the kind of methods that are available or commands that are available within the change method, and we have to specify the table and the current name of the column and the name which we wish to give it. Again, we have to run RakeDB migrate, and this is to avoid active record pending migration errors, which are rather annoying errors that we might see if we try to run the Rails server off without having run our migrations. So we've looked at adding or removing columns, and we use Rails generate to make a migration, and we need to write the code for the change method manually to change our column names. Migrations can also cause errors in our views and when model attributes written in the code are altered. So do bear that in mind when you've run migrations, or if you often a simple answer to server Rails S issue can be just to run the migrations when you first started a new working on a new app. So I hope you've enjoyed that and look forward to our next lesson.